much. We appreciate it very much. How many people came in the very first year of the track in 2013? So yeah, there you go, our veterans. All right, we appreciate it, believe me.
And none of them have died.
Yeah, that's right.
Tonight.
You have lived to tell the tale. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a good thing. Hopefully you're having fun or you wouldn't keep coming back, right? Now, how many of you, this is your very first DragonCon? That's awesome. Yeah. And you came because we have all these wonderful author guests and media guests on this track, right? Is that why you're here?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to choose to believe anyway. So, in any case, you heard the story about our charity drive contribution, our Battle of the TV Show fandoms, and we'll probably just briefly remind you of that at the end. Some of you made donations, and we appreciate that. It is the DragonCon charity, and it's just our way of making it kind of a fun thing for you to participate in if you so choose. And we will have an announcement of who won at the end. How many of you follow our Facebook page? Okay, how many of you follow us on Twitter? Well, I gotta admit that I need to re-announce what that is because I actually have somebody that helps with Twitter. But you need to follow us on Facebook, okay? That's where you get all the best announcements. DragonCon Urban Fantasy, very easy to find us. So please find us there, and the page does stay active all year long. In any case, we'll go ahead and get underway, but I would like, we've got somebody gesturing. Okay, never mind. We'll wait until these people have their... No, that's quite all right. Oh, look at that, it's great.
Best costume contest ever.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're going to do, well, anybody who's in costume, stand up, let's look at them. I guess we're going to see. Nice work, folks. Yes, the panelists are having a good time looking at them all and actually saying out loud who they are, so that's a good thing. We're going to talk about, tonight we're going to talk about blending comedy and calamity. And somebody laughed. I guess that's a good start. Anyway, the first thing we're going to do is have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we will get underway. I will have some questions, and then we'll save some time at the end for those of you who would like to ask questions of the panel. If you will line up over here on the side, I'll let you know when that time comes. We'll have a wireless mic that okay, we got both Leah and Jennifer. They might fight over the mic. I don't even know. That could be something fun to watch, maybe more comedy. But they will be there for you to be able to answer the question or ask the questions. So I will get started.
Sorry, 2 mics enter, 1 mic leaves.
That's right, 2 mics enter.
Don't
Thunder, prepare yourself.
It's late, I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Trust me, I completely understand.
Yeah, so I confess we all sat around deciding that drinking was a good idea before this panel. So
I might add that none of them offered to bring me in.
you didn't
I
ask.
got tequila right here.
You didn't ask. You're all very careful not to force alcohol upon people who don't ask for it. Hi, I'm Carrie, Vaughn. I write lots of different things. I'm probably best known for the Kitty series of novels about a werewolf who hosts a talk radio advice show. A werewolf named Kitty. I don't know why I'm on this panel.
Can't imagine.
Thank you for coming.
I'm Richard Kadrey. I write Sandman Slim, and I'm full of tequila tonight. So. I think our next 2 guests might be somewhere along the same lines. So.
Well, hi. My name is Chuck Wendig. What's wrong with you? I write a lot of books. books, and one of you should probably wrestle the keyboard out of my hands. Not way too many. In terms of urban fantasy, the Miriam Black series is probably what I am best known for, and I've got a whiskey sour in my hand right now. It's in my body.
Zero is an acronym.
Last year I started with My Name is Jim Butcher. But this year I'm going to say My Name is Chuck Wendig. So my name is Delilah Dawson. I write the Blood series, the hit series, Servants of the Storm, and the upcoming Wake of Vultures under a pseudonym, which is Lila Lloyd, who is so much cooler than me. I like you. I like you too.
I'm Eric Asher. I write the Vestic Urban Fantasy series in the upcoming Steam-born young adult trilogy.
Hi, I'm Jim Richard. I'm the author of the Dresden Files, and I'm completely sober at the moment. Some of us were professionals and could make it
Writers never drink.
Yeah, apparently we're bookending the panel here, so. We'll keep, Jim and I will keep everyone else in line. I'm sure that's going to work, right? Well, my idea behind this panel this year, we always do the humor panel on this track just because it's one of the aspects of the genre that I think people really enjoy. It does help alleviate the darkness, right? But what I want to take a slightly different tack this time, and that is that how do you combine, combining something that's really funny with something that's really serious. You're not necessarily going for the funny. In other words, it's not supposed to be a humorous book, but you're somehow using the humor at the same time that you have these, terrifying sometimes life and death situations. And does using the humor make the theme any less serious? And they're all looking at me now.
Okay. I think it's not about making it less serious. It's about making the audience even more uncomfortable than they already are. Which is going to sound awful and manipulative, and you'd be exactly right to think that. Well, the example I'm thinking of is not actually from my own stuff, but the movie An American Werewolf in London, which I think is absolutely masterful in the way that it combines horror and comedy. And the scene in particular I'm thinking of is towards the end, when our main hapless werewolf character he's in a porn theater watching porn, and part, as you do. Anyway, part of the mythos of the movie is that all of his victims are now haunting him as rotted bodies that are inflicting guilt trips on him. And it's kind of a beautiful thing, and the longer the movie goes on, the more rotted they look. So this is towards the end of the movie, so he's got this whole row of rotted corpses next to him, berating him. If you haven't seen this movie, it's one of the classics of all horror cinema, and you really, really should. So there's a scene where the character is watching, well, he's not watching, he's just in the theater because he's trying to hide. And he's got this whole string of rotted bodies who are English, so they're speaking these very proper English accents and berating him in very understated English ways, except that they are rotting bodies. And you're watching this and you're laughing. It's the most hysterically funny thing you've ever seen, and at the same time, you're horrified. You're feeling both of those things at the same time, which is a really neat trick. And it's this razor sharp line that if you can manage that, it's a wonderful thing. It's just this amazing, masterful thing that you can do because you're making your audience feel two things at exactly the same time, which is from a writer's standpoint, it's really cool. But from a reader's standpoint, if you can manage that, you read to feel things, and if you can feel two conflicting things at the same time. The closest I think I've ever gotten to it is there's a book where Kitty kind of, she's talking to one of the vampires, and the vampires, she thinks he's joking, if I catch this guy, I'm going to rip his head off. And she thinks, ha 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 ha, everybody says that, right? Well, the guy catches the guy and actually
Does rip his head off.
and she says, oh my God, I thought you were joking. And because what else would you think in that moment, right? So it's trying to achieve, you're not trying to lessen the horror. The horror is exactly the same. You're trying to put two things together that should not be together at all. And it's fantastic when you can do it.
But I also discovered in my work, you can get away with anything if you make it funny. Sandman Slim, the first book, the opening of the book is a man crawling out of hell, rolling onto a pile of burning leaves, catching on fire, rolling around like an idiot, trying to put himself out, going to a bar, having a drink, and then decapitating an old friend.
As you do!
Like you do.
I'm like the Sabian, come on.
Oh, what?
What does he do with the decapitation?
That's the question.
Oh yeah, the guy isn't dead. I mean, he kills him in such a way that the head is still alive. His body's just dead. So he now, that's his best buddy. He now carries around his head with him wherever he goes.
It's awesome.
But I realized when I first wrote the thing, I was really under the influence of writers like Richard Stark and Jim Thompson. So I wrote it as straight, hardcore, dark American crime fiction from the 50s. And it was horrible. You know, when you realize in your own work, I don't want to read what I've just written. But then it's like, I went back and it's like, you know, if I make this guy a sarcastic son of a bitch, it all works. Suddenly decapitations are really funny. And you can get away with that stuff. And it's the same thing, it doesn't change, as you said, it doesn't change the horror, but it puts it in a slightly different context where you realize a man has had his head cut off, I'm laughing, but there's a body on the floor and there's a head in this guy's hand and the head's screaming because he just lost his body. It's a wonderful dichotomy. And if you can achieve that, like I said, you can get away with anything.
So I was fortunate enough where I went to school, I had a degree in both English and religion. And so sort of combining those two things, there's this very important sort of literary technique that they use, which is called dick jokes.
Whip one out, Chuck.
What's that?
Whip one out.
Whip one out.
What
Okay,
is
I don't
jokes?
I think I did. No, so like, actually more seriously, if you look at, it's going to sound strange, but cuisine, right? Thai cuisine has sort of this fundamental principle that a lot of the dishes have a multitude of tastes that come in together. Sweet and sour and salty, and all these things sort of meet together, and that actually accentuates the entire dish. And I think horror is really accentuated by humor. And it's not necessarily that it's shticky or jokey. Like, no one's necessarily, it's not about making a joke in a time of horror. It's about a moment of horror that is so intense and absurd that it's almost kind of funny. And two good examples of this in film, and first I should note that there's a writer who does this very well, and it's Joe Lansdale. So definitely read Joe Lansdale. But in cinema, number one, Pulp Fiction, you shoot Marvin in the car, something that is completely unexpected. And it's horrible, and you kind of laugh, it's like this, it's like, ah! But then the second Evil Dead film really encapsulates the absurdity of, because it's still horrific. It's not like, you know, when the deer is laughing on the wall, or he's cutting his own arm off, it's like he's madly laughing as he's doing it. It's still horrific. It does not excuse horror for humor. It doesn't jettison the one and then suddenly become just funny. It's both of those things at the same time, and it's kind of amazing when it does it.
I feel like humor is the pressure balance for horror, just naturally, without trying. I broke my back in October, and the first thing I did was not to call my husband crying, it was not to call 911, it was, I was laying on the back and I pulled out my phone and I tweeted, "Happy birthday to me." And then I went to the ER and tweeted, "For birthday, I got a back brace." But that was how I dealt with the terror of, oh my God, I am helpless and I can't move on my own, and maybe I've severed my spine, but my toes are moving, so it's probably fine.
Probably, yeah.
And in one of my first books, I had a moment like that, where it was that kind of whistling through the graveyard, something horrific was happening, and the character said something funny, and my editor was like, "Is that necessary?" And I was like, "Yeah, have you lived through something horrific? Like, you're not sitting there going, oh my God, this is horrific." You're going, if I can find a way to laugh about this, I'm going to super lose my mortality salience and freak out. So I feel like those are natural beats for how the human psyche deals with, holy crap, I almost died.
Damien in my books is a necromancer, and you can imagine that's fairly unsettling for his parents. They found out when he was fairly young. So the way I kind of, I guess, created a dichotomy is he takes a dead parrot and puts the soul of a dead pirate into the dead pirate. And that kind of carries forward in the later books. And it's just kind of a hint in the early books, but later on it becomes more of a little shticky, but I kind of like it shticky because it fits back with his personality as a child.
Was it a mostly dead parrot?
It was a...
What was the question? We've done horror and there was a lot of horror.
What can you do with the parrot?
Oh.
Does it,
I
now,
have nothing to say.
does using humor, if you've got a situation, or say in a story where you've got things that are funny, but you've also got very serious things going on at the same time, does that, does that make the serious stuff any less serious?
Oh God, no. Delilah's completely right. Humor is always it's a pressure valve, and part of telling a story is as a good storyteller, you always want to ratchet up the tension, but you can't keep doing that indefinitely, and you can't just do it on a steady increase. You've got to introduce some interludes in there. You've got to introduce some rhythm to it. And humor is one of the ways you can use to break up almost anything if you're overwhelming it with too much of whatever you're doing. You can leaven anything with humor and generally improve it.
Well, that's actually a really good segue into my next question. So thank you, Jim. And we'll actually start down at that end, since I got reminded prior to the panel by someone who shall remain unnamed, and yet to my left, that it was always a good idea to switch back and forth without having to be reminded. And so you talk about the balance. A lot of these people have worked with me for years. Some of these people on this panel. Some of the people, actually a lot of the people on here tonight have not. So they're just learning that if they sit closer to me, they get asked first. Delilah knows, so that's why she's way the heck down there.
Sit far away from Carol and eat all of her chocolate.
That's right. Well, there's plenty of chocolate on the table, so unless people ate it all. Here, there's some over here. You want some? But you talked about you talked about balance, and that is also something that, to me, as a reader, is very important. That someone not go too far with either the humor, because then it gets to where it's not really that funny. If you go overboard. But since that, I was most interested in the idea of people who are not writing a humorous novel, but you're writing a novel with humor in it, that you have to have that balance so that it doesn't overcome what you're doing. And how do you approach that, or what's kind of a rule of thumb for you that keeps you from doing it?
Go 3PO, but never go Jar Jar. Because that's kind of the example that I like to use when talking about something like this, because 3PO and R2 provided comic relief through the original Star Wars movies. Occasionally they were annoying, occasionally they were touching, but mostly they were the clowns on the sideline, and they're like a character Shakespeare used. We've got all this epic, super heroic things going on, and then 3PO and R2 can make their comments. And occasionally you'll have a rogue character who can say something funny. Solo can say something funny. Leia could occasionally say something funny, but Luke absolutely could not. He was the serious epic hero guy. He didn't really get to do funny. But then when you get to the second series, you've got Jar Jar, and Jar Jar is not merely, kind of in the background participating and commenting on things. He's actively stealing spotlight from story. And about the time you're actively stealing spotlight from story, you're taking something away from the main thrust of whatever it is you're actually doing that is not comedy, because you're trying to tell some other sort of story. That's the point at which you've gone Jar Jar. And it's when you are losing page counts to your yucky yuck yuck moments. That's when it's too much. That's when you're too far.
Yeah,
It's like 3PO and R2 were like Abbott and Costello, kind of the nice classic muted, whereas Jar Jar was more Jerry Lewis. And it was not
Don't you
functional.
dare do that, say that to Jerry.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
I walk off this panel. I'm not even a Jerry Lewis fan, but come on.
Lisa's sorry.
Time to flip some tables.
Chuck, you said she was cool.
Vouch for you, man.
All right, Eric.
Oh, I got the words.
That was probably
What was the question?
Were you at the bar with the rest of them?
Yes, I was at the bar with Carrie, I apologize.
Oh, okay. The question is, how do you keep that balance between the humor and the more serious aspects so that the humor does not become more the focus of the story? Or it might not even be in a whole book, but in a particular scene. And all I can say is, let's see, go 3PO.
Yeah, it's important. For the one person out there that's read my book, I use Foster a lot, who's like a warrior fairy type that grows from his diminutive size like a 7-foot colossus. And a lot of times, one of the characters will make a fairly stupid joke that's not all that funny, and Foster will respond with a very deadpan, like, no, we should just cut his head off and be done with it. And in that way, I like to balance out the humor with the darkness in the urban fantasy stuff that I write. And I think it really keeps it moving at, maybe an even keel isn't the right word, but it keeps it moving forward, and I still find it amusing.
My short answer is have a great editor. Because I am not good at drawing that line. My son broke his leg when he was 5, and I hear this thump from upstairs and crying, and I run upstairs like you're a mother, your heart's in your throat. Before he can say anything, I hear, "You don't need to amputate!" And my mom and Nancy too lovely and courteously, do I need to amputate? So yeah, have people you trust, editors, agents, beta readers, to tell you like, hey, this is over the line, or you took this too far. You can't decapitate this many parrots.
One is okay, but don't go too far.
I think you can get away with 2.
Oh, 2, okay.
2.
I think you can amputate children. Is that what we're saying here? That is okay. Is that what the question was? There's this thing that happens sometimes when you're trying to write funny. And trying to write funny is its own kind of curse. Because that's how you start to get it wrong, is when you're trying to write funny. And horror and humor, they're supposed to kind of work well together, and those tastes are supposed to be intermingled. But when you actively try to make a joke, and the characters are trying to make a joke, that's when, for me, I've gone a little too far. The situations to the characters are often deadly serious. The situation is what's absurd. And so the humor comes through to the reader, but not necessarily to the character. Like there's an analog with dramatic irony where the characters know something, or the audience knows something that the characters don't. And it's kind of like there's a dramatic irony version of humor where the audience gets the joke, but the characters don't. It's deadly serious to them. And some of the best comedy is sort of about making serious things funny inadvertently. And to me, especially when you're trying to mix it with horror, there's a huge value in just trying to figure out how to make it serious to them, but absurd and funny to you and the reader.
I think there's a certain amount of instinct that's built into something like this. There's this magical thing I learned, a phrase I learned in an old writing workshop, the bullshit detector. And you know when you're bullshitting your audience with a joke, just to have a joke in there. If there's any writers in here, young writers and things like that, I think one of the big things to develop in yourself is trusting your instincts, is to learn to listen to yourself. You might want to put a joke in there, but there's some part of your brain going, no, you're putting the joke in there because you're afraid of what you've just written. Or the opposite, you know, it's like you've written something very serious that you know could use some levity, but you're afraid of taking away from that moment. It's really listen to that inner voice, and I mean, you need an editor.
Thinking about this at all at the time that I was writing these books. This is all gleaned in hindsight, so take it for what it is. Characters comment on this throughout the book. Wait a minute, you're a werewolf named Kitty. How did that happen? And you know, Kitty's answer to that is, come on, I was named Kitty before I became a werewolf. Don't give me a hard time. So, you know, stop, you know, pushing me around for this. It's not funny, but of course it is funny. And it worked because the characters within the series acknowledged the silliness of it, which matches the reader's feeling of the silliness of it. If I had named her Kitty and then never had anybody comment on it in the books, I think that would not have worked. And I've actually, like, I have sat there and listened to people talk about this. You know, two friends will be standing there and they'll pick up the book, A Werewolf Named Kitty, and the friend will say, oh yeah, but they addressed that in the book, so it's okay. Okay, I'll read it. You know, it's like, you know, people instinctively know that this is a ridiculous thing. So every now and then in the book, the characters say, guys, this is a ridiculous thing that this werewolf is named Kitty. And Kitty's like, yeah, I know it's ridiculous. Can we move on now? And they do. And just having, you know, and not, you know, they don't do it every single book. They don't do it every single scene. It's like every single person she meets does not go, oh my God, you're a werewolf named Kitty. But just enough to reassure the reader that yes, you are allowed to think that this is a silly thing. And now we're going to move on. and it's you know, it's just validating the reader's feelings, I think. And like I said, it's not something I was thinking about at the time, but in hindsight, it was a necessary thing to just make the reader feel a little bit better about laughing at the joke, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, it does, because also humor that, I like the expression about beating a dead horse, you know, and that's, when you do that with a topic, whatever it is, that's just what that reminds me of. Is there a time that you feel the humor is not appropriate within the genre? That is there something that, it could be something personal to your work or something that you've read somewhere else that something that you just wouldn't do because you just don't find a particular topic amusing and think that it should be treated with more seriousness rather than humor? And Carrie, it's your turn.
Well, yeah, I've had two things pop into my head, and that's violence against children and domestic violence. I'm sure if I thought about it some more, I could think of some more in-depth answers, but those are, I'm going to go with my gut, and those are the two things that popped into my head. Just because those are things that are so real and that so many people unfortunately have experience with, that I don't think, I'm not going to say it's impossible, because the minute you say it's impossible, somebody will come up with a really great example of how it works. But I think I would be very leery. It would be very hard to make those things funny without just being so completely crass and disrespecting somebody's real world experience with those.
Everything she just said, plus the idea of sexual violence, I see this tossed off too easily in a lot of things. Not in a humorous way, but I think Game of Thrones is a show that just thinks rape's a great plot point all the time. And I really think that's one of those themes. All the two you mentioned, and I think sexual violence. There's just, I don't know how you do anything to make that funny. This is the darkest part of the human soul, and I can't do it.
No, you can't really make those things funny. You probably shouldn't try, because you're probably not good enough to do that. There's exceptions to every rule, but I mean, generally speaking, anytime you take someone's real world experience and you're speaking to an audience who has possibly endured something, and you try to make it jokey or sticky, that's, I think, it may be an issue, especially when it's handled kind of ham-fistedly. So I would steer clear of certain topics like that, just to be, compassionate and empathic for the reader. So yeah, what they said.
Yes. I think they covered like the cardinal sins, but again, like this is why we have beta readers and agents and editors. Like, if you are in doubt, if you think it might be on the borderline, other people will let you know very quickly if it doesn't work. And there's times when you have to say, no, I trust myself. No, this is one thing where you trust them because you can't tell someone else how to reinterpret what they've lived through or that you haven't experienced yourself.
Another yes. It's sexual violence and violence against children. I've known, sadly, quite a few people that have been affected by one or the other, or both. And it's awful, and I can't even imagine a way you could try to make that life harder without being a disaster.
I'm going to dissent, because there should always be a dissenting voice. And I think in a lot of ways that's what humor is. Humor is one of those ways that you can usually find to say something that you can't say any other way. So I'm not going to. I mean, it's not something that I personally would approach unless I found something completely appropriate. And I don't know. I'm not all that smart. But at the same time, I don't want to ever say, no, you can't make a joke about that ever. Well, I mean, if you're somebody who has lived through that, maybe joking about it is how you deal with it. But I'm not saying it's going to go over to a big audience, but if you've been there and you know, maybe you know better. That's it. I mean, it's just kind of how I see humor. Humor is something that it works because it goes against the normal flow of what you expect. And I really hate to say, no, you can't make a joke about something. Probably there's somebody somewhere who can make a joke about something that will at least be darkly funny. And sometimes that's what you need to get through that kind of thing.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then if you guys have questions that you would like to ask, if you would stand up over here against the wall. You've got a wireless mic, and because if you try to ask a question from out there and the people in the back can't trust me, they won't read the mic. So if you would like to ask a question of the panel, you go right over here. And my question is, that it is in reference to inside jokes. Now, we all enjoy reading them as long as we get them, right? Am I right? As long as we get them, we're like, yeah, right. And then if we don't, we're like, what? And then it kind of makes you feel kind of stupid. But from the author's perspective, I'm sure that the inclination is that it's fun, to be able to do that so that people, so that your tribe is kind of, into what you're saying. But how do you avoid going too far with them? Or first off, tell the folks whether or not you use them a lot, or whether you use them occasionally to make them, using them occasionally is fun. But in any case, I'm just curious how you approach that particular topic, and we'll start with Jim.
Most of the kind of inside jokes I like to make are jokes for people who have read the entire series, somebody who's just picking up this book and getting started won't get. But my kind of standard for that is that I try and make it transparent to the person who hasn't read it yet, so that they don't know that a joke has gone by. But if I have some character make a kind of a straight-faced reference to something, to somebody's character or something like that long-term fans of the series are very familiar with, and they'll know that, oh, okay, that is not a direct, straight reference, that a first-time reader will look at that and not really see that it's gone by, and hopefully that doesn't speed bump the first-time reader, because that's always something I try and be very aware of with the series. I try and make it accessible for people who are just walking in, because a lot of times people just walk in. It's like it's book 16 now. Somebody's going to be the first book they read was book 16, and that person should get an experience and not get shut out. I like having an audience that is bigger, so.
I think I kind of try to do what Jim does, and not nearly as well, yeah. But I love having things that were referenced in an early book. I mean, granted, my series only has 4 books so far, but there are things in the 4th and 5th book that reference little inside things from the 1st and 2nd book, and I really enjoy putting that stuff in because it does kind of reward someone that has either reread the series or reads it back to back to back, or just has a tremendously good memory as Rocket in here, because, yeah.
I feel like as long as you can not alienate the reader, but maybe reward the people that either have read your books or that recognize pop culture references. I have a lot in mind that are like, you know, a line from Star Wars, or Firefly, or Community, or Venture Brothers, where it's like, if you read that, you get this little treat, you're like, oh my god, I know that line, but if you don't, you just gloss over it as a normal phrase. The second book in my Blood series, Look at As She Wants, one of the characters, kind of as a joke, like half of what she says is a permutated version of Walt Whitman quotes. And then, unless you've read Walt Whitman and you dig Walt Whitman, you'd be like, you know, oh, this makes sense. She's kind of a strange person. You're like, oh my god, she's totally Walt Whitman reincarnated. But you wouldn't know that otherwise, and you wouldn't feel hopefully excluded from really digging on Walt Whitman, because that's really geeky.
A lot of people have said the word reward, which is true here. You want to reward your reader, but you don't want to punish the reader.
No, you do.
Well, punish them in a different way. You don't want to exclude them and make them feel like they don't belong to the world in which you're telling, the story in which you're giving them. And one of the ways you do that is by giving them so many inside jokes that it actually diminishes the story, that it becomes, again, that kind of shticky, like, I'm just keeps needling, like, it's just a series of self-references for the works that have come previously. Your job is to focus on a great story, and then those inside jokes are sort of little things that punctuate that great story, and that reward the readers that have come along. Like Jim said, that you're kind of rewarding more the readers who have come along with you in the journey, and that is, I think, the appropriate path to take.
I'm going to be old Jim on this. I'm going to be the dissenting voice. We have a real simple policy: fuck puns, fuck inside jokes.
It's a hairy situation.
Richard should tell us what he really thinks. Yeah.
So are we drawing a distinction between inside jokes and allusions? Because I love allusions and like references to other things. I put a line from The Last Starfighter in one of my books. It was so sad that nobody asked me about it.
Well, yeah, that's true. There is a similarity between those two things.
Yeah, and I would call those inside jokes as well, and because they do kind of, you know, give a little bit of buzz.
Well, if you're using the illusion to be funny, yes.
Yeah, and you know, as a reader, I like them, you know, sparingly. You don't want to have the entire, unless that's the point. You know, if you're writing, you know, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or something, heck, you know, go to town. But we are not all Douglas Adams, so maybe it's better if we don't try that. Yeah, it has to be sparing. It has to be transparent to or invisible to people who don't get it. I think it's fine if it doesn't, you know, bring the story to a screeching halt. You know, so in one of the books I sent Kitty to Chinatown, and I called the book Kitty's Big Trouble. Yes, I did that. And people had the gall to come up to me and ask, did you name that after the movie on purpose? Yes, I did. That was not an accident.
What
you know,
movie?
Okay, we need to run some DVDs right now. But at the same time, it was in this, you know, once again, I named my werewolf character Kitty.
Right.
So I felt like if I didn't do things like that, you know, I also have Kitty Goes to Washington, which, yes, it was blatant. Yes, it's a blatant reference to a bunch of other things, and I don't care. Because it really fit with the spirit of the series and the character, and to not, you know, there's a point where not doing it would have been a failure of matching the tone of the series and the character. So I was totally happy doing that kind of thing. And I was really disappointed that only one person asked me about the Last Starfighter quote in that one book.
Hey, so what about that Starfighter quote?
So in one book, the character didn't die. Exactly. She went off with the gods or something. So in the next book, another character is asked, so what happened to that character? And Kitty says, well, I prefer to think of her as battling evil in another dimension. Totally invisible as far as I know, because it's something that she would say. And yet, if you know Last Starfighter as well as I know The Last Starfighter, I really love that movie.
Really, really well, apparently, yeah.
I love that movie so much.
Okay, Jennifer, we
Start
got
with
our first
questions?
question.
I wondered if you get to a point in your writing and you realize you're too serious and you either introduce a character in order to get the humor, like you were saying, use the guy who, got to a colossus and that was his point, or like Butters who, plays his music to try and calm down a zombie Tyrannosaurus Rex. Or if you
You didn't try, ma'am.
If you like get to that point in your writing and you're like, man, this is like Stephen King deep, or this is just awful. This is bad. Do you change a character or introduce another character or do something to try and infuse humor without changing the story, I guess?
Anybody want to take that?
Tyrannosaurus, come on.
Well, Butters was originally introduced because I had a particularly gruesome ME scene coming up, and they were going to be examining a corpse that essentially had been diced, like ham, and things were getting fairly dark in this story as it was going, and I wanted to have a character who was a little bit more lighthearted to kind of leaven some of the darkness a little bit. So I stole the medical examiner from the prophecy. Yeah, that guy, from the prophecy, that where the little scale that he was using to weigh the organs, he put like a couple pieces of duct tape on it so it looked like a smiley face, and he was making jokes the entire time, and was sort of had the mane of a stand-up comedian. And so I just stole that character and I made him a brunette and Jewish.
And a polka player.
And named him Butters, and he liked polka, and he was sort of this wacky character who kind of had this lighthearted demeanor to kind of counteract the grim stuff he was doing. And I designed him as a throwaway character for that one scene just because I was going to have him right there. But it turned out that people liked him so much that he got such a positive reaction from my readers that I brought him back the next book, and then later again in the future. And eventually I got to the point where Deadbeat was coming out, and originally book 8 had been going to be where Deadbeat was, and my editor had said, well, what's the plot of the next book? And, well, it's going to be a little bit more personal. It's going to be about Harry and Molly and his relationship with them, and she's like, oh, well, maybe for this next book you need to come up with a plot that's a little bit meatier, a little bit heavier, a little bit more firm. And I'm like, wait, are you saying that the next book's going to go to hardback? She's like, I didn't say that. So I was like, okay, well, I got to do the necromancer thing with the zombie T-Rex, and I've got to have a side, because Harry always has somebody who's like designated sidekick in my head while I'm doing plots. And I was thinking for that one, it's like, well, who can I have? Because it's going to be all these necromancers and zombies and undead things. And I'm like, Waldo Butters, the medical examiner. Because not only is he thematically appropriate, the coroner, to counter all the necromancers, but he is completely useless to Harry in a fight. And not only that, but he was going to be the first time in a hardback, and Butters was pretty much a newbie to the whole supernatural world, but he was a smart guy, so he was going to be sitting around asking smart questions about the new supernatural world, which is going to save the new readers who were just picking up a new hardback the trouble of feeling stupid for not knowing what was going on, because Butters was going to be doing that for them. He was going to be the one, what the hell's going on? And then the new readers wouldn't have to ask that. So, but yeah, I mean, that was where, and then Butters just sort of, and then I realized when I was doing that, oh my gosh, one day this guy's going to have a lightsaber. There you go. But originally, he was humored to lighten up a completely gruesome scene that I was writing, where there was going to be bits of a human body pattering to the floor, because somebody bumped into the tray.
Play off what you're saying about a medical examiner is a big character. Go online, find some books. Cops, paramedics, darkest humor you're ever going to find. It's the only way to survive for those people. And look for both of those. There are books about both, and just Google them. You'll find some transcripts some descriptions, things like that. They're really important people to think about in terms of like really getting humor in the darkest moments.
Whatever you do, do not get two EMTs in a one-upping contest.
Yeah.
I will win.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
All right, I got one thing. I went on a cruise once with a group of EMTs. I've got some pretty I've got some pretty bad allergies, and they thought it was the funniest thing to be like, we can give you a tracheotomy in like nothing, like a ballpoint pen, and you're good.
I took the cheap road out and hit. I just introduced a fat Labrador. It's like the best silent joke ever. It's like, you ever try to go to a gunfight with a fat Labrador? It's like, hey guys, what's going on? Yeah, it's totally like the silent partner of humor.
Silent part.
I honestly don't even remember what the question was, but I'm going to tell you a story. My dad lost his pinky finger. He had a log splitter, and the two logs came together, and his pinky was in between them, and it smashed. And so he went to the hospital and said, I have this problem, obviously. It looks like pudding. And they said, well, what we'll do is we'll maybe, fix it or cut it off and we'll cauterize the wound. He's like, well, what's that going to cost me? And so they told him what that's going to cost him, and this is years ago. And he said, yeah, I don't want to pay that, so hold on 1 second. So he went out to his truck, and he got a pair of bolt cutters. And he took his pinky, and he cut the pinky off, and then he let them do the rest. He said, all right, you can now do this part. Now I'm in a hospital, it's a good place to do this. But fast forward to many years later, when there are children running around, both me, friends, and then later niece, and so forth, other family members. And he would play this game of pull my finger. And you think that the classic conclusion to pull my finger is that he's going to let out some sort of gaseous eruption. But really how he concluded it was, you stole my finger. And then he would hold up his pinky at it and chase the children around the room with his cauterized pinky stuff.
I think that answered your
Why do
question.
you have a pinky finger?
My group of friends at home, there's two guys named Leaf. There's Leaf 10 and Leaf 9.5. Ask how they got their nicknames.
How did they get
One of them lost half a finger, so he's Leaf 9.5. I had to ask. Leaf 9.5, which one is that? Oh, he's the one with 9.5
It
fingers.
sounds like porn stars.
Which is why it's funny, right? Yeah, there's nothing funnier than missing finger stories. It's great.
Well, I do want to point out, Chuck, that when you were telling that story, that half of the audience, and maybe it was even some of the same people in the same breath somehow, were laughing and going, oh, at the same time.
Horror and humor.
Hi. A lot of your characters are human or human deficient. And so what I was wondering is, yes, politically correct. No, my question is this. Do they know they're being funny when they're being funny, or are they surrounded by so much wackiness that that's just normal for them?
Can you guys hear him in the back? Okay, I don't think the mic's on.
It's on. It's on.
Stop asking for sugar.
Again, try it
One more
again.
time.
My question is this.
There you go. Can you hear him now?
All your characters are either human or human deficient, or surrounded by a bunch of people who are not human. Okay, so my question is this. Do they know they're being funny around regular people when they say the things that they say?
Wow.
Sometimes, I don't know. There are times when Kitty thinks she's being funny and she's not, really. And that's where the humor comes from, is when Kitty tells a joke and nobody laughs, and then the reader laughs. And so there's two different levels of joke going on there. And yeah, I try to make them just people being people. They're not actually trying to make anybody laugh. They just do things, and hopefully the reader, the situation is such that the reader thinks it's funny, whether or not anybody within the story, like the whole Kitty name thing. She doesn't think it's funny anymore, but everyone else does. So I'm going to call it situational.
The main part of it was, the thing is do they understand humor? because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
not human.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yes, Stark in the Sandman Slim books definitely knows he's going for jokes. I mean, again, I mentioned cops and EMTs. He's definitely, I know cops and EMTs, so I'm definitely going for the kind of worldview they have. I mean, this is a guy who crawled out of hell, literally. So he has that point of view. Yeah.
I have two kind of urban fantasy series. One which is sort of urban fantasy adjacent, which is the Mirror Black series, and then I have Mookie Pearl, which is a more straight shot down the middle. It's kind of a man who meets the intersection of the criminal underworld and the actual physical monstrous underworld. Miriam Black, I think, tries to be funny. She sort of has a grim gallows humor to her, and she's definitely human. But as the books kind of go on, her psychic ability, which again, seeing how people are going to die, sort of kind of erodes some of her internal humanity. But she sort of, I think, preps it up and props it up by trying to be funny. On the other hand, Mookie Pearl, the protagonist of The Blue Blazes, is actively unfunny. He's kind of never funny. And it's sort of almost the joke in and of itself is that he's so completely unfunny that the rest of the world sort of finds that amusing. He's the perpetual straight man, and he doesn't even understand jokes. He's almost too dumb to understand jokes. So that sort of is its own kind of special source of humor.
I feel like my heroes are so embroiled in horrible circumstances that they've been forced into that they are almost not making jokes so much as bleeding pus from a wound, just trying to get it out of them. Not physically, I mean, they're not just like squeezing it on their head. No, when they say things, it's more like, I just had to get that out and I can go on dealing with like the demons that are taking over my world. But it's more of an unintentional, wow, that just came out and now I have to kill a bunch of stuff.
I'm wondering if you have plus demons.
That's a personal question. He's my doctor.
I have some characters that try to be funny, and I have some characters that fail miserably at it. And I like having that mix. Because you have characters that like are deliberately trying to tell a joke, and they're like, "I am so funny," and it's like, that was a terrible joke. But every now and then I'll get feedback from a reader though. They're like, "You have a terrible sense of humor." I missed the mark there.
A lot of times, one of the gauges that I use to try and figure out exactly how human a given being, inhuman being is in the Dresden Files universe at least, is do they have a sense of humor? And the more likely they are, I mean, the closer they are to understanding what mortality is and what humanity is, the more likely they are to be able to make a joke or to throw off a one-liner. Somebody like Vaughn, yeah, he can make jokes. I mean, he doesn't really tend to go out of his way to be a stand-up comedian, but he can. Whereas when you get to somebody like Mab, she is in many ways very far from a human being. So, when she looks at Dresden and says to him in a level tone, "You did well today. We'll continue tomorrow. I'll most likely kill you." And Dresden is like, "Oh, it's a joke. It's a reference." And she's like, "No." I thought it was a Princess Bride reference. I thought we were having a moment. It wasn't happening. And definitely the darker and the more villainous the characters tend to be, the less likely they are to be able to make a good joke. And the worst of them take themselves so seriously that no, they would never make a joke, but that would get in the way of their universal domination. That would be inefficient. But yeah, I mean, it all depends. There are other characters that are like little ones, like Toot Toot. Toot Toot takes himself completely seriously. He is earnest about everything. He doesn't make jokes, but he winds up being this lighthearted and funny character. Even though, really, he also carries around a razor blade and occasionally slashes people up with it. But because of who he is, he gets to be this funny character. But generally speaking, no, he doesn't know it. He doesn't know he's adorable. He takes himself pretty seriously. He's much like my dog that way. I've got a 20-pound Bichon Frise who's convinced that he is a Rottweiler. And I haven't had the heart to tell him he's French. I treat him as though he's a warrior. Now, to be fair, he has saved my son from a bear, and he was attacked by a coyote and fought it off. And Well, and I happened to be there like 40 feet away running towards him screaming, but he didn't break off a tooth on the coyote to be in his own speaking in his own defense. I'm pretty sure that coyote, because that's where the bunnies usually hang out in my yard, where you hit the dog, and I'm pretty sure the coyote, there's a coyote with a tooth sunk to the bone and broke off, thinking to himself, man, that bunny was completely unreasonable. You know, the coyote's not trying to be funny, but that's kind of hilarious.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering if you have any examples, or remember an instance with a joke or a moment that you did that either, your editor or even made it to print that you thought was just hilarious and then got feedback that was like, no, that actually was totally didn't work. And
I blocked those out.
What do you say? You got nothing?
You're contractually obligated not to tell you about this.
So the answer is probably yes.
They're gonna tell you that.
I wanted to ask about using comedy as a lure, specifically like writing a book about a werewolf named Kitty, and then holy crap, you're dealing with abuse of power and government and all of this stuff. I picked up the book because it was a werewolf named Kitty.
Sucker.
Yeah, and then there's a book that I intentionally went really, really, really dark. Kitty's House of Horrors, which, once again, kind of a funny title, but it's basically, a slasher movie in prose, and I did that on purpose. If it was a lure, it was not intentional. I wasn't trying to do a bait and switch there to that level. But yeah, I wanted to cover a range of things, and I also, I'm, gosh, thinking out loud here, it's late. I want to write about serious things. I don't just want it to be, Three's Company with werewolves, which was actually done, and it was kind of funny. So, no, I'm sorry, that was a little bit of editorializing there, but. Yeah, so Being Human, I called it the Urban Fantasy Three's Company, and a lot of fans of the show got really mad at me for that.
Which version?
Well, I saw the British version, mostly. But, yeah, I forgot where I was going with that. But, I just, part of what I wanted to do with the series was get political and get serious and write about, werewolf war veterans and do the slasher movie and do all of this, because, the roots of this genre are in horror. However funny we want to get. Once again, I'll go back to An American Werewolf in London, which is really funny and really horrifying. And being able to cover that range was something I really wanted to do with the series. So while I'm really happy that the name might have drawn some people in, but I think people find out pretty quickly whether or not the book is something they, that tone that goes back and forth is something they want to continue with. Yeah. Anyone else? Bait and switch?
Well, the main character of Hit, her name is Patsy Cline. And we went to the editor, they're like, why is this important? And I was like, because sometimes people get stuck with dumbass names.
Yes.
It's normal, like we're not all have these fantastic names and an author spent 7 days like writing notes and scratching them out. Like sometimes you just get stuck with that.
We got one more question.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
my question is, when you put in these small humorous,
Is the
when
mic
you,
now?
sorry, no, I was just standing too far away. When you put in the small humorous characters like Waldo Butters or the Fat Labrador, and do you know that when you put them in, they're going to turn into a Knight of the Cross with a lightsaber, or I'm sorry, I haven't read your books. I'm probably going to after this.
That's good. Yeah, we all agree.
But do you know where these characters are going to end up when you put them in as bit parts?
Sometimes I know where somebody's going to end up, and sometimes I've got no idea. I mean, it's fun when a character surprises me. When I'm working on such a long-term project, there's not always a lot of room. Because I'm writing this story. It's 20 books long and a big 3-book trilogy at the end, and I'm trying to stay on schedule more or less and get to it. And because it seems to have been working so far, so I don't want to vary too far from it. But when there is room for a character that grows up and surprises you all of a sudden, that's a very delightful thing as a writer. Because it feels like you're not really doing it. I mean, you are, but it doesn't feel like you are. It feels like it's coming together all on its own, and you're like, that's amazing. I was the channel for some sort of divinity here. Because it feels like I didn't work at all.
That's called your subconscious.
Yeah.
That's your best friend.
That's trusting yourself again, trusting your instincts.
Yeah, exactly. And so when that does come through, it just feels amazing. It's so much fun, and you want to roll with it. But other times it's just work, and you put the work in, and you get the character where you want him to go.
You know, the Fat Labrador just came up because it was like someone's going to knock on your door, there's going to be a dog barking, and that's going to make it slightly more terrifying to knock on their door, and suddenly I'm stuck with this fat lab. There's no wrong with the fat lab.
Okay. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. We also very much thank you. You've been a great audience, but we do have a giveaway, which I should have done before I said that, but as they've already noted, it's, late. And if you will look on your chair, on the right leg of your chair at the very top, look for a green sticker in the front of the right leg of your chair.
If it's there, it's going to be right here.
Does Karen want to do a demonstration? She did a very good job doing it. If we can find an empty chair.
We're going to need a stewardess.
Yeah, that's what she was doing before, yeah. Did anybody find a green sticker?
Oh, she's got one.
A plain
Oh,
green
yeah,
sticker?
right there.
That's blue.
It'd be a green sticker thing, it'd be right here.
Looks green from up here.
If you find one that's a different color, leave it where it is.
Well, no, if nobody finds the green one, we'll go with the blue.
It's too late, double parents do the
We voted as green.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh.
It's kind of blue.
That's okay. Nobody found the green one? Okay, you get a book. Yeah, you get
There you go.
And as a reminder, we do have our little containers up here for the charity drive if you are so inclined. And we hope that you will be back to more of our programming. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.